Avery Monroe had spent the last 2 years hiding from dangerous men, not the kind that appeared on crime documentaries or front-page headlines. The most dangerous men were often the ones who smiled politely, wore expensive watches, and knew exactly how to make a woman feel trapped without ever touching her. Avery knew that better than anyone. At 27 years old, she had rebuilt her entire life around one simple objective: never give anyone that kind of control over her again. Tonight was supposed to be safe. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala was one of Manhattan's most prestigious events, hosted inside the Grand Astoria Ballroom overlooking the glittering skyline. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from ceilings painted in gold leaf. Wealth moved quietly through the room dressed in custom suits and couture gowns. Politicians exchanged whispers with billionaires. Corporate kings discussed acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars over glasses of rare champagne. To everyone else, it was a celebration. To Avery, it felt like entering enemy territory. She adjusted the sleeve of her elegant navy dress and forced herself to maintain the calm expression she had perfected over the years. Most people mistook her silence for confidence. The truth was far more complicated. Beneath her composed exterior lived an emotionally scarred woman who had learned how to survive by controlling every visible emotion. Fear stayed hidden. Pain stayed hidden. Heartbreak stayed hidden. Control was safety. And safety was survival. Her invitation had come through her financial consulting firm. Declining wasn't an option. The company wanted representation at the event, and Avery happened to be the most qualified employee available. She had spent the entire week trying to convince herself that attending for a few hours would not destroy the carefully protected peace she had spent years building. Yet the moment she entered the ballroom, something felt wrong. The atmosphere carried a strange tension beneath the luxury. Conversations seemed carefully measured. Certain groups remained isolated from others. Security was unusually heavy for a charity event. Men stood near entrances pretending to be staff while quietly monitoring every movement around them. Avery couldn't explain why, but the sensation reminded her of prey unknowingly entering a hunting ground. Across the ballroom, powerful figures moved through the crowd with practiced confidence. Most guests saw successful businessmen and investors. Very few recognized the hidden syndicate leaders who quietly controlled enormous portions of New York's underground empire. Avery knew none of this. She simply wanted to survive the evening. After nearly an hour of forced networking and exhausting conversations, the room felt increasingly crowded. The noise became overwhelming. She needed a moment to breathe. Scanning the ballroom, she noticed a single empty chair positioned near the front of the room beside a large round table. It seemed strangely untouched despite the crowd. Perfect. Without giving it much thought, Avery crossed the ballroom and lowered herself into the vacant seat. The reaction was immediate. A conversation stopped mid-sentence. A champagne glass froze halfway toward someone's lips. Several guests suddenly looked away. Others stared. The temperature of the room seemed to drop. Avery frowned. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She glanced around, confused by the growing silence spreading across the ballroom. Nearby guests exchanged nervous looks. A woman sitting at the next table visibly paled. Across the room, two security personnel instantly straightened. Fear traveled through the crowd like an invisible wave. Avery's heart began pounding. She resisted the instinct to stand. Years earlier, she would have panicked. Years earlier, she would have apologized before even understanding what mistake she had made. Not anymore. She was not a victim. Whatever was happening, she would face it calmly. Then the ballroom doors opened. Silence consumed the room. Avery followed everyone's gaze. A tall man entered surrounded by an aura of absolute power. The crowd subtly parted before him. No introductions were necessary. No announcements were made. Yet everyone knew exactly who he was. Damien Moretti, the king of an empire few people openly acknowledged and even fewer dared challenge. His reputation moved through New York like a whisper. Powerful, dangerous, untouchable. The kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because the world already listened. As he crossed the ballroom, conversations vanished entirely. Avery suddenly realized something horrifying. He was walking directly toward her. Every guest watched. Every breath seemed suspended. Security exchanged uneasy glances. The empty chair no longer looked ordinary. It looked important, reserved. Avery's pulse accelerated, but her expression remained controlled. Damien stopped beside her. The entire ballroom froze. Everyone expected consequences. Everyone expected humiliation. Everyone expected the king to reclaim what belonged to him. Instead, Damien studied her quietly. His dark eyes locked onto hers. 1 second passed, then another. The silence became unbearable. And then, to the complete shock of everyone watching, Damien reached for the chair beside her, pulled it back, and sat down. Damien Moretti had watched senators shake in fear. He had watched CEOs abandon billion-dollar negotiations because his name appeared on a guest list. He had watched rival bosses carefully choose every word in his presence, terrified that one wrong sentence could cost them influence, wealth, or access to his empire. Fear followed Damien everywhere. It always had. But the woman sitting beside him? She looked more inconvenienced than intimidated. And for the first time in years, the king became curious. The silence surrounding their table stretched across the ballroom like an invisible storm. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on them. Guests waited for Avery Monroe to realize the mistake she had made. They expected panic. They expected apologies. They expected her to abandon the chair immediately. Instead, she simply sat there, composed, controlled, quietly observing the room. Avery could feel the attention pressing against her from every direction, yet she refused to let it affect her. Her heart was pounding, but she had spent years mastering the art of hiding fear. Trauma had taught her that visible weakness invited control. And control was exactly what she had spent 2 years escaping. She turned toward Damien calmly. The reaction alone seemed to surprise him. Most people avoided direct eye contact. Most people lowered their heads. Most people surrendered power before a conversation even began. Avery did none of those things. Not because she was fearless, because she was tired. Tired of allowing fear to dictate her choices. Tired of feeling hunted. Tired of letting powerful men control the atmosphere around her. Across the ballroom, whispers began spreading between tables. Wealthy socialites exchanged nervous glances. Business leaders subtly monitored the interaction. Several guests appeared genuinely confused by what they were witnessing. Even Damien's security team looked uncertain. Their king had not corrected her, had not dismissed her, had not reclaimed the chair. Instead, he remained seated beside her, as though her presence had been expected all along. The tension became almost unbearable. Damien leaned back slightly, observing her with the patience of a man accustomed to studying people before making decisions. He noticed details others missed. The careful posture, the controlled breathing, the quiet intelligence behind her eyes. Most importantly, he noticed the absence of ambition. Every person in the ballroom wanted something. Power, money, influence, access. Yet Avery seemed interested in none of it. She looked like someone counting the minutes until she could leave. That intrigued him more than any performance ever could. Meanwhile, Avery became increasingly aware of the strange gravity surrounding Damien Moretti. He barely spoke. He barely moved. Yet the entire ballroom adjusted itself around his presence. The realization unsettled her. Power wasn't loud. Real power never needed to be. It existed quietly, like a whisper, like a shadow, like a king who never needed to remind anyone he ruled an empire. For reasons she couldn't explain, Avery found herself comparing him to the men from her past. The difference was impossible to ignore. Those men had constantly demanded attention, constantly demanded control. Damien demanded nothing, yet somehow possessed complete control anyway. The thought bothered her more than it should have. Across the room, several influential figures began taking notice of the unusual interaction. A prominent hedge fund executive discreetly whispered something to his companion. A powerful political strategist shifted his attention away from a conversation worth millions. Most concerning of all, a small group of international investors seated near the rear balcony seemed intensely interested in Avery's presence beside Damien. They watched carefully, quietly, patiently. Damien noticed them. He noticed everything. The atmosphere continued changing throughout the evening. What should have been a simple charity gala was slowly becoming something else entirely. Conversations lost focus. Attention repeatedly returned to the mysterious woman sitting beside the most powerful man in the room. Rumors were already forming. Who was she? Why had Damien allowed her to stay? What connection existed between them? No one had answers, and uncertainty was often more dangerous than truth. As the evening progressed, Avery remained entirely herself. She didn't attempt to impress anyone. She didn't seek Damien's approval. She didn't exploit the attention surrounding them. That authenticity planted something unexpected inside Damien's mind. Not attraction, not yet. Something more dangerous. Interest. The beginning of an obsession. By the time the event finally approached its conclusion, the ballroom had transformed into a maze of speculation and hidden agendas. Avery gathered her purse. Relieved the exhausting night was almost over. Freedom felt close. Safety felt close. She stood from the chair and prepared to leave. For a brief moment, Damien watched her walk away. Then a discreet vibration interrupted the silence. One of his security directors stepped forward immediately. The man's expression changed the instant he checked his encrypted device. Concern appeared, then urgency, then something far more troubling. Damien accepted the phone and scanned the alert. His eyes hardened. The atmosphere around him shifted instantly. Because according to the security report that had just arrived, someone inside the gala had spent the entire evening watching Avery Monroe. And they weren't watching her by accident. Avery thought surviving the Mafia boss was the dangerous part. She was wrong. The real danger was already waiting outside. Watching. Following. Preparing to take her. The moment Avery stepped out of the Grand Astoria ballroom, the energy around her changed. Inside, the luxury of the gala had created an illusion of safety. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and carefully rehearsed smiles had disguised the tension beneath the evening. Outside, Manhattan felt colder. The wind moved between towering skyscrapers, like a warning whispered through the city itself. For the first time that night, Avery could finally breathe, or at least she thought she could. She descended the stone staircase outside the venue and adjusted the strap of her purse. The streets glowed beneath rows of elegant lights reflecting against wet pavement. Luxury vehicles lined the curb. Wealth and power surrounded her from every direction. Yet an uncomfortable feeling settled deep inside her chest. The sensation was familiar. Too familiar. The feeling of being watched. Her pace slowed slightly, then increased. Years of surviving a toxic relationship had sharpened instincts most people never developed. She had learned how to recognize danger before it fully appeared. Learned how to notice subtle shifts in her surroundings. Learned how fear often arrived long before proof. Her heart pounding, she glanced behind her. Nothing, just strangers moving through the city. Still, the feeling refused to disappear. A block later she noticed them. Two men, far enough away to avoid attention, close enough to remain visible. When she crossed the street, they crossed too. When she slowed down, they slowed. The realization tightened her stomach. Fear quietly returned. Avery immediately thought of one person. Ethan Cross, the man she had spent 2 years escaping. The man who never accepted endings. The man who believed control was love. For months, she had successfully disappeared from his world. New apartment, new routines, new phone number, new life. Now she wondered if somehow he had found her again. The possibility alone was enough to make her pulse race. She continued walking, trying not to reveal her concern. The city suddenly felt larger, darker, less predictable. Behind her, the distance between the men slowly began shrinking. Avery turned another corner, then another. The streets became quieter, the crowd thinner, the atmosphere heavier. Every instinct told her to keep moving, to keep escaping. to never stop. Ahead, a black luxury sedan sat parked beneath a street lamp. The tinted windows reflected the city lights like dark mirrors. At first it seemed ordinary. Then the rear door opened. Avery stopped, not because someone exited, because nobody did. The open door simply waited. An invitation, or a trap. The message was clear. Her breath caught. This was no coincidence. The men behind her continued approaching, not rushing, not threatening, confident, as though they already knew the outcome. For a brief moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Old memories surged forward. Fear, helplessness, control. Then another thought emerged. She was not a victim. Not anymore. Avery straightened her shoulders and prepared to change direction. That was when everything changed. A convoy of black SUVs suddenly appeared from opposite ends of the street. Silent, precise, controlled. The vehicles moved with synchronized purpose, surrounding the area within seconds. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The confidence of the men following her disappeared. Doors opened. Professionally dressed security personnel stepped out. No chaos, no shouting, just quiet efficiency. The kind that came from absolute loyalty. The kind that protected a king. Avery immediately understood who had sent them. Damien Moretti. The realization shocked her more than the situation itself. Within moments, one of the security agents approached her respectfully. "Miss Monroe." His voice remained calm, professional, controlled. "Please come with us." Avery stared at him, confused, suspicious, relieved, all at once. Before she could respond, another security officer received information through an earpiece. The team's formation subtly adjusted. Their attention shifted toward the men who had been following her. Something unspoken passed between them. Something serious. The atmosphere grew colder, more dangerous, yet strangely safer. Because for the first time all night, Avery no longer felt alone. She was surrounded by a shield she had never asked for. Protected by a man she barely knew. Escorted toward one of the armored SUVs, Avery couldn't understand why Damien Moretti cared at all. Their interaction had lasted less than a few hours. She was nobody important, yet somehow his empire had moved to protect her. The thought lingered as she entered the vehicle. Inside, luxury replaced the tension outside. Soft lighting illuminated the spacious cabin. Reinforced glass separated the interior from the city beyond. For the first time that night, Avery allowed herself a slow breath. Safe, or at least safer. Moments later, another door opened. Damien entered, the king himself. His expression remained unreadable as he took the seat across from her. A security director immediately handed him an encrypted tablet. Damien reviewed the information in silence. Then his eyes narrowed. Something had changed. Something unexpected. Something concerning. Avery watched the shift happen in real time. The atmosphere inside the SUV became noticeably heavier. Damien looked toward his security chief. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Finally, Damien lowered the device. His voice was calm, too calm, which somehow made the news even more terrifying. Because according to the intelligence report that had just arrived, the men following Avery were not connected to Ethan Cross. They weren't working for her past. They belonged to a rival syndicate. And that meant Avery Monroe had just become part of a war she didn't even know existed. Every instinct told Avery to run. Everything she had learned over the past 2 years warned her that powerful men always came with hidden costs. Power demanded loyalty. Control demanded sacrifice. Safety always arrived attached to conditions. At least that had been her experience. Yet for the first time in years, she slept through the night. Inside the fortress of the most dangerous man in America. The Moretti estate stood nearly an hour outside Manhattan, hidden behind miles of private roads, dense forests, and security systems sophisticated enough to protect government officials. As the armored SUV approached the property, Avery stared through the window in disbelief. The estate looked less like a home and more like the headquarters of a private kingdom. Tall iron gates opened automatically. Layers of security monitored every entrance. Luxury blended seamlessly with protection. The entire property radiated one message. Nothing entered without permission. Nothing left unnoticed. For someone who had spent years feeling hunted, the sight created a strange conflict inside her. Part of her wanted to leave immediately. Another part felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. Safe. The feeling unsettled her. The main residence appeared beyond a line of towering trees, illuminated by elegant exterior lighting. It was massive without being excessive, beautiful without trying to impress. The kind of place built by someone who possessed power long before wealth arrived. The king had built himself a fortress. Yet somehow it didn't feel cold. Inside, Avery expected intimidation. Instead, she found calm. The staff treated her respectfully. Nobody asked unnecessary questions. Nobody stared. Nobody treated her like an intruder. It felt as though everyone had received the same instructions. Protect her. Give her space. Let her breathe. That realization stayed with her long after she was shown to a guest suite larger than her entire apartment. The room overlooked private gardens illuminated by soft evening lights. Fresh clothes had already been arranged inside the wardrobe. A tray containing tea and light food waited near the fireplace. Nothing extravagant, nothing uncomfortable, just thoughtful. For several minutes, Avery simply stood there, absorbing the silence. No anxiety, no pressure, no feeling of being watched. The absence of fear felt unfamiliar. Later that evening, she wandered through part of the estate, unable to sleep. Curiosity eventually led her toward one of the main hallways where she discovered framed photographs, architectural plans, and pieces of history connected to the Moretti family. That was where she unexpectedly encountered Damien. Alone, without security, without the intimidating atmosphere that usually followed him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Avery had expected a man obsessed with control. Instead, she found someone remarkably respectful of boundaries. Damien never demanded explanations, never asked invasive questions, never attempted to force trust. The realization challenged everything she believed about powerful men. As days passed, a strange routine developed. Breakfasts occurred separately. Conversations happened naturally. The estate never felt like a prison. It felt like a refuge. For the first time since leaving Ethan, Avery stopped checking every room before entering. She stopped waking up in the middle of the night, expecting danger. The constant tension living beneath her skin slowly began fading. She was healing, and she hated how much she noticed it. One afternoon, she discovered a secure section of the estate containing emergency command rooms, reinforced safe areas, and private security facilities. Damien explained them without drama. Panic rooms, emergency shelters, protective systems, tools designed to shield the people under his protection. Listening to him, Avery noticed something unusual. Every security measure focused on defense. Protection, preparation, not control. The distinction mattered, more than she wanted to admit. As their conversations deepened, unexpected similarities began surfacing. Damien rarely discussed his past directly, but small details emerged through quiet moments. Loss, betrayal, responsibility, the burden of carrying an empire while trusting very few people. Avery recognized loneliness when she saw it, because she carried her own version. Two emotionally scarred people living behind different walls. One built from fear, the other built from power, neither knowing how to lower them completely. Days passed, then a week. Trust began growing where suspicion once existed. Not romance. Not yet. Something stronger. Respect. Loyalty. The foundation of something neither expected. One evening while searching for a book in the estate's private library, Avery accidentally opened the wrong door. Expecting storage, she instead found a secure office illuminated by a single desk lamp. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed the files. Her name. Everywhere. Avery Monroe. Heart pounding, she stepped closer. Inside were surveillance reports, photographs, security assessments, addresses, dates, information stretching back months. Long before the charity gala. Long before she had ever met Damien Moretti. Her breath caught, because the files revealed something impossible. Someone had been protecting her for a very long time. and every document carried the same authorization signature. Damien Moretti. Powerful men fear losing money. Powerful kings fear losing control. But Damien Moretti had begun fearing something far more dangerous. Losing her. The discovery of the surveillance files should have terrified Avery. Instead, it left her confused. For nearly an hour, she sat alone in her room, staring at the evidence. Every document confirmed the same impossible truth. Months before the charity gala. Months before she had accidentally sat in his chair. Months before she even knew Damien Moretti existed. Someone inside the Moretti empire had quietly monitored threats around her. Protected her. Watched over her. Shielded her from dangers she never knew existed. The realization changed everything. Because protection required intention, and intention required a reason. Avery couldn't stop wondering why. The following morning, she finally confronted Damien. She expected excuses, half-truths, deflection. Instead, she found honesty. Damien explained that her name had first appeared during an internal investigation involving financial corruption. Several shell corporations connected to rival syndicates had been exposed through accounting reports Avery unknowingly helped prepare. She had never intended to challenge criminal organizations, yet her work had placed her directly in their path. At first, she had simply been a person of interest. Then she became a potential target, and eventually, someone worth protecting. The explanation should have reassured her, yet created a new fear. Because if rival syndicates considered her important enough to monitor, then the danger surrounding her was growing. And danger always attracted consequences. The estate changed over the next few days. Security increased. Additional personnel appeared. Private meetings lasted longer. Encrypted messages arrived constantly. Something was happening beyond the walls of the fortress. Something serious. Avery noticed it immediately. Employees whispered more carefully. Security teams rotated more frequently. Even the atmosphere felt different, like the calm before an approaching storm. One evening, she found Damien standing alone on a terrace overlooking the estate grounds. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance while silence settled comfortably between them. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Avery asked the question she had been avoiding. "How bad is it?" Damien didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an honesty she wasn't expecting. "Worse than I'd like." That simple answer told her everything. A rival syndicate had begun moving openly against Moretti interests. Corporate partnerships were collapsing without warning. Investment projects were being disrupted. Business allies suddenly became distant. Invisible pressure spread through Damien's empire like cracks beneath frozen ice. It wasn't war. Not yet. But everyone could feel it approaching. For the first time, Avery witnessed the true burden of being a king. The power, the responsibility, the loneliness. Damien carried an empire on his shoulders, yet somehow remained isolated inside it. The realization softened something inside her. As days passed, their connection deepened naturally, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through quiet consistency. Shared breakfasts, long conversations, comfortable silences. Trust developed where fear once existed. Loyalty slowly replaced suspicion. For the first time since arriving, Avery no longer viewed the estate as a temporary refuge. It felt like a safe place, and that frightened her, because safe places could become important. Important things could be lost. Meanwhile, Damien found himself fighting a battle no rival syndicate could understand. A battle against his own thoughts. He had spent years making decisions based on logic, control, strategy. Then Avery Monroe arrived. Suddenly, every risk calculation changed. Every threat assessment became personal. Every security report involving her demanded immediate attention. The shift unsettled him. A king could not afford emotional weaknesses. Yet whenever danger approached her, something inside him reacted instantly. Protect. Shield. Keep her safe. The instinct grew stronger every day, more dangerous every day. One evening, as Avery laughed softly at something during dinner, Damien experienced a realization he couldn't ignore. The thought arrived quietly, without warning. Mine, not ownership, not possession, something deeper. A protective loyalty so powerful it threatened his carefully controlled world. And that was exactly when everything began falling apart. The betrayal came from the last person anyone expected, a trusted ally, a man who had served the Moretti Empire faithfully for years, someone who had earned Damien's confidence completely. The betrayal unfolded silently, carefully, perfectly. By the time the deception was discovered, it was already too late. Avery had disappeared. No warning, no explanation. One moment, she was inside the safest estate in America. The next, she was gone. The security alerts spread through the mansion within seconds. Heart-pounding, Damien reviewed the reports personally. Every detail confirmed the same devastating truth. Someone from inside his own circle had taken her. Someone he trusted. Someone who knew exactly how the estate operated. For the first time in years, genuine fear entered Damien Moretti's eyes. Because this wasn't an attack on his empire. This wasn't an attack on his power. This was personal. And somewhere beyond the estate walls, Avery Monroe had just become the center of a betrayal that could destroy everything. Entire cities feared Damien Moretti. Politicians respected him. Billionaires negotiated with him. Rival syndicates carefully calculated every move around his empire. His name alone carried enough power to influence markets, reshape alliances, and silence conflicts before they began. But nobody had ever seen him angry. Not truly angry, until someone touched what he considered his. The moment Avery disappeared, the atmosphere inside the Moretti estate transformed completely. The calm fortress that had once felt untouchable suddenly became the center of an emergency no one had imagined possible. Security teams moved continuously. Communication channels remained active around the clock. Every member of Damien's inner circle understood one thing. The king was no longer operating from strategy alone. This was personal. Meanwhile, Avery found herself inside an unfamiliar private estate located somewhere beyond the city. The property wasn't threatening. In fact, it was surprisingly comfortable. Elegant furnishings, luxury accommodations, professional staff. Yet comfort meant nothing when freedom was missing. The realization sat heavily in her chest. For the first time since arriving at the Moretti estate, she felt genuinely alone. The betrayal hurt more than the situation itself. Someone Damien trusted had orchestrated everything. Someone close. Someone who understood the empire from within. As hours passed, Avery forced herself to remain calm. Panic solved nothing. Fear solved nothing. She had survived worse. She was not a victim. That truth became her anchor. Instead of breaking down, she began observing, listening, paying attention to details. Every conversation, every schedule, every unfamiliar face. Her emotionally controlled nature became an advantage once again. Somewhere inside the confusion, she realized something important. The people holding her weren't treating her like a hostage. They were waiting. For what? She didn't know. Back in Manhattan, Damien had launched the largest internal investigation his organization had conducted in years. Loyalty was suddenly under examination. Trusted relationships faced scrutiny. Long-standing alliances were questioned. Betrayal had entered the empire, and betrayal was more dangerous than any rival. For the first time, members of the Moretti organization witnessed something unsettling. Damien stopped caring about appearances. He stopped caring about negotiations. He stopped caring about financial consequences. Every resource shifted toward a single objective. Find Avery. The empire mobilized. Private intelligence networks activated. Business operations paused. Strategic partnerships were leveraged. The underworld noticed immediately. Rumors spread through New York like wildfire. The king had chosen someone, and now the entire empire was moving because of her. That realization created panic among rival syndicates. Because when powerful men act emotionally, outcomes become unpredictable. Days passed. Pressure increased. Invisible battles unfolded across boardrooms, investment firms, and political circles. Information became currency. Loyalty became priceless. Every lead pointed toward a larger conspiracy. Someone wasn't simply targeting Avery. Someone was targeting Damien himself. The distinction changed everything. One evening, Damien finally received the breakthrough he needed. A hidden financial trail connected several recent corporate attacks to a rival syndicate operating through international networks. The same organization responsible for monitoring Avery before the gala. The same organization that had engineered the betrayal. The same organization now attempting to destabilize the Moretti empire. The realization transformed a personal crisis into something larger. War, not the kind fought with headlines. The kind fought through influence, control, power, secrets. For the first time in years, competing syndicates openly chose sides. Some remained loyal to Damien. Others quietly aligned themselves with his enemies. The balance of the underworld shifted. Yet through all the chaos, Damien's focus never changed. Avery remained a priority, because somewhere along the way, she had become more than a responsibility, more than someone needing protection, more than a person connected to an investigation. She had become essential. The truth terrified him. Days later, a critical location was finally identified. An isolated luxury property connected to one of the rival organization's shell companies. Everything pointed there. Every lead, every clue, every hidden trail. Damien personally traveled with a trusted team. Hours later, he entered the property, heart pounding for the first time in years. The moment felt unreal. Every hallway brought him closer. Every step carried the weight of uncertainty. Then he found her. Avery stood near a large window overlooking the ocean. Safe, unharmed, alive. Relief struck harder than he expected. For a brief moment, neither moved. Neither spoke. The silence carried everything words could not. Then Avery noticed something. The expression on Damien's face. Not victory, not relief. Concern. A deep concern that immediately made her stomach tighten. Because while Damien had finally reached her, the information arriving through his encrypted device revealed a terrifying truth. The kidnapping had never been the objective. Avery was bait, a carefully designed distraction. And while Damien focused every resource on finding her, someone else had been moving against the heart of his empire. Avery believed everything started the night she sat in Damien's chair. The truth was far more terrifying, because Damien already knew exactly who she was. The revelation arrived less than 24 hours after Avery was brought back to safety. The oceanfront property, the betrayal, the hidden rival syndicate, none of it had been random. Every answer seemed connected to a much larger story, one that had begun months before the charity gala. For days, Avery had replayed that night in her mind. The empty chair, the silent ballroom, the king who chose to sit beside her instead of sending her away. She had convinced herself it was coincidence, fate, luck. Now she was beginning to understand how dangerous the truth actually was. Back at the Moretti estate, Damien finally opened the files he had spent months keeping hidden. The war against the rival syndicate had exposed too many secrets to keep pretending. Avery deserved answers. Complete answers. Not half-truths. Not protection disguised as silence. The private office overlooking the estate gardens felt unusually quiet as Damien placed a thick folder on the desk between them. Avery stared at it, heart-pounding. The folder carried her name. The same name she had seen inside the surveillance room. The same name that somehow connected her to an empire she never intended to enter. Slowly opening the file, she began reading. Page after page revealed a hidden investigation that stretched across multiple states, international banking networks, shell corporations, and investment firms. Months earlier, while working as a senior financial analyst, Avery had unknowingly identified accounting inconsistencies buried inside legitimate corporate reports. To her, they looked like numbers. To Damien, they looked like evidence. Evidence of money laundering operations worth billions. Evidence connected to several rival syndicates. Evidence powerful enough to destabilize entire criminal networks. Without realizing it, Avery had exposed the financial backbone of an underground empire. The discovery should have terrified her. Instead, it explained everything. The surveillance, the threats, the men following her. The reason rival organizations suddenly became interested in an ordinary financial analyst. She had never been random. She had become valuable, and valuable people became targets. Avery slowly looked up from the documents. For the first time, she understood why Damien had entered her life. The answer surprised her, because it wasn't obsession, at least not in the beginning. It was protection. Months ago, when her name first appeared inside the investigation, Damien had ordered quiet surveillance to ensure rival syndicates couldn't reach her first. At the time, she was merely a witness who didn't know she was witnessing anything. But over time, something changed. The reports became more personal. The updates became more frequent. The concern became genuine. Damien had watched her survive, watched her rebuild her life, watched her continue moving forward despite carrying invisible scars. And somewhere between observation and protection, she stopped being another name inside a file. She became Avery. The realization left the room silent. Outside, evening sunlight painted golden reflections across the estate gardens. Inside, years of emotional walls began weakening. For Avery, the truth answered questions she hadn't known how to ask. For Damien, it meant finally lowering his guard. Something neither of them had done before. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Damien finally broke the silence. Not as a king, not as the head of an empire. As a man, he admitted that protecting her had stopped being part of an investigation long ago. He admitted that every threat report involving her received his personal attention. He admitted that when she disappeared, nothing else mattered. Not money, not power, not the empire, just her. The confession carried no manipulation, no expectation, just truth, raw and uncomfortable. Avery felt something inside her finally relax. For years, she had associated powerful men with control, with fear, with conditions. Damien offered none of those things. He offered safety, choice, a place where she could breathe, a place where she never had to prove her worth, a safe place. The realization changed everything. For the first time, trust replaced doubt completely. Loyalty replaced uncertainty. And the emotional distance between them quietly disappeared. The woman who spent years hiding was no longer running. She was becoming powerful, not because of Damien's empire, because she finally stopped letting fear control her future. As twilight settled over the estate, they stepped onto a private balcony overlooking the property. The atmosphere felt different, lighter, honest. The war outside still existed. The danger still existed. But for one brief moment, none of it mattered. The king and the woman who accidentally changed his world stood side by side, choosing each other. Finally, then a sharp notification echoed through Damien's security device. His expression instantly changed. Avery noticed it immediately. The warmth disappeared. The calm vanished. And as Damien's gaze shifted toward a distant rooftop beyond the estate grounds, his eyes narrowed. Because somewhere in the growing darkness, someone had just taken aim, and the war was far from over. The first time Avery sat in that chair, the room expected her humiliation. Months later, she sat in the same chair again, and this time, everyone stood. The final weeks of the syndicate conflict reshaped New York's hidden world in ways few people fully understood. The rival organization that had spent months targeting Avery and attempting to weaken the Moretti empire slowly collapsed beneath the weight of its own deception. Financial networks were exposed. Secret partnerships dissolved. Powerful figures who once operated confidently from the shadows suddenly found themselves isolated. The war Damien had feared was ending. Not because someone won through force, because truth finally surfaced. The evidence Avery unknowingly uncovered months earlier became the very thing that dismantled the rival network. The accounting trails, hidden transactions, and financial records she had once viewed as ordinary numbers ultimately revealed an entire structure built on manipulation and betrayal. For the first time, Avery understood the full impact of her own strength. She had never been rescued because she was weak. She had been targeted because she was powerful. The realization changed how she viewed herself. The woman who once spent years hiding from fear was gone. In her place stood someone entirely different. Someone who had survived. Someone who had grown. Someone who finally understood her worth. Meanwhile, Damien Moretti faced a transformation of his own. The king who spent years trusting only strategy now understood something far more valuable. Loyalty could not be purchased. Trust could not be demanded. Real connection required vulnerability. And Avery had forced him to remember that. As peace slowly returned to the empire, the atmosphere inside the Moretti estate changed dramatically. Security remained strong, but tension disappeared. Conversations became lighter. Staff members smiled more often. The fortress that once felt like a place designed solely for protection finally felt like a home. A future began taking shape, not through promises, through consistency. Avery became involved in several charitable foundations funded through Moretti Enterprises. Her financial expertise helped create programs supporting women rebuilding their lives after emotional trauma. The work gave her purpose beyond survival. For the first time in years, she wasn't escaping something. She was building something. And Damien watched every step with quiet pride. Not because he wanted control, because he wanted her happy. The distinction mattered. Months later, the Sterling Foundation announced another high-profile gala inside the same Manhattan ballroom where everything had begun. Invitations spread through political circles, corporate networks, and private syndicate channels. Everyone knew Damien Moretti would attend. The real surprise was who would arrive beside him. The evening felt strangely familiar. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. Luxury filled every corner. Power moved quietly between tables. Yet the atmosphere was completely different. There were no whispers of uncertainty. No questions about Avery Monroe. No confusion regarding her place beside the king. As Damien entered the ballroom, hundreds of guests turned toward the entrance. Avery walked beside him, confident, elegant, fearless. The woman who once felt hunted now moved with quiet certainty. People noticed. Respect followed, because everyone understood what she represented. Not weakness, not vulnerability, loyalty, strength, a queen who had earned her place. As they approached the center of the ballroom, Avery noticed it immediately. The chair, the same chair, the chair that had accidentally changed her life. For a brief moment, memories returned. The silence, the confusion, the fear, the uncertainty. Then she smiled, because none of those things controlled her anymore. Damien gently gestured toward the seat. No words were necessary. Avery sat down, and the impossible happened. The room stood. Every guest, every executive, every politician, every syndicate representative. A silent acknowledgement, not of Damien's power, of hers. Emotion tightened in her chest. Months ago, she entered the room as someone trying to survive. Now, she sat there as someone who belonged. The queen of the empty chair. Across the ballroom, Damien watched her carefully. The sight affected him more than any victory ever had. Empires came and went. Power shifted constantly. But moments like this were rare, real, permanent. As the evening continued, music filled the room while conversations resumed around them. For the first time since meeting, neither Avery nor Damien felt the weight of danger pressing against their future. Peace finally seemed possible. Then a security director quietly approached their table. His expression immediately caught Damien's attention. The man carried a sealed black folder. Classified, urgent. Without speaking, he placed it before Damien. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Avery noticed it, the same way she always did. Damien opened the file. Read the first page, then the second. His expression hardened. Slowly, he looked toward Avery. The room continued celebrating, completely unaware that everything had just changed again. Because according to the intelligence report lying on the table, a powerful international syndicate had officially entered New York. And they had issued a direct declaration, not against the Moretti Empire, against Damien Moretti and Avery Monroe personally. The king and his queen had survived one war. A far greater one had just begun.